welcome to the fifth episode of From Scraps to Yaps. I'm so excited to have you here, Katie. I absolutely loved your book. I'm sure you can tell from the million messages I sent you. But would you like to introduce yourself, a little bit about your background, and of course about Where Darkness Bloomed?
Sure. So I'm Katie Stark. I am an attorney turned writer, author. I live in the Southern United States, and so this is Where Darkness Bloomed is obviously my debut novel. Very exciting, and it's just it started as sort of a creative outlet to kind of help me. Law can be a very legalistic, of course, but a very legalistic and kind of a dry career at times. And so Where Darkness Bloomed was sort of my creative outlet. I've always loved Greek mythology since I was a little kid. I loved Greek mythology. And so I had this creative outlet that really just kind of became a runaway train. And then we started working on getting it published, and here
Yeah.
we are. So it's a retelling of two primary myths,
Yes.
really. But the primary one, kind of the central focus of the novel, the way it started was just a retelling of Persephone and Hades. So
Yeah.
um, God of the underworld comes and falls in love with the goddess of spring and kind of captures her and takes her away to be his wife. And so that's sort of happening in the underworld.
Mm.
And then the other primary plot point of the novel is going to be a retelling of the Trojan War, kind of through the lens of multiple characters who are involved. So
Yeah.
that's sort of the broad
Yeah,
scope.
I have to say for a debut novel, this was incredible. Like it was such a good read. And you would drop like so many small little snippets here and there, like which like goes back to the lore, like the goddess of discord, or like Poseidon's
Mhm.
grudges, or like why he had grudges. And you can't like as a normal person who's not always in Greek mythology, obviously can't remember all those little points. So it was like reading your book, having an enjoyable time, but also remembering all the things I really enjoyed about Greek mythology. So I'm thankful that I got to be part of this journey.
It started as a retelling of Hades and Persephone. I've always loved that. I've always loved that
Yeah.
myth. So it's always been one of my favorite. It's incredibly evocative, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, you just have it's almost like a Beauty and the Beast kind of scenario where,
Yeah.
Lord of the Underworld, Goddess of Spring, unlikely pairing, and so you
Yeah.
this incredibly evocative myth. And once I started writing that, um, I got to a point where I thought I was done, and it was only like 60,000 words.
Yeah.
I was
What's
like, this.
the normal like word count that authors go for, like debut authors?
So with fantasy, fantasy is a little bit longer than
Yeah.
like contemporary romance. So I would say for fantasy, I was thinking I was going to end up, well, when I ended up at 60,000 words, I didn't know where I was going to end up because I was just starting to toy around with the idea of getting it published. So
Yeah.
I thought that that was done. That's actually a
Right.
first, what I had was a first draft. And now
Yeah.
looking back, I say that was a first draft.
Yeah.
It was not a finished novel. But where we ended up, I was thinking once I decided, okay, I'm going to get it published and I'm going to pursue this other plot line, I was thinking
Mhm.
we'd end up somewhere around 100,000 words.
Yeah.
And it came in, I think the final clocked in right at 113. So,
Yeah.
um, kind of generally in that ballpark, but it kind of doubled, from when I was
Yeah.
thinking it was done and I had a first
Yeah.
draft. It literally almost doubled. And
Yeah.
it's because I kind of pursued the plot line of the Trojan War, but then Greek mythology is so interconnected, right? Like you were saying, everything, you kind of pull a thread here and it
Yeah,
touches something over
absolutely.
here. And so once I started adding details and then seeing how, the Trojan War touched 1,000 different characters, and
Yep.
you don't want to overwhelm the reader, but you also want to give enough depth to make
Yeah.
it, to make it a rich retelling. And so it just kind of went turned
Oh,
into a
I
runaway train from
appreciate
there.
I appreciate the depth so much because I loved seeing how connected like the I think it's like the grievances of the gods and like all the pettiness arguments that these siblings are having up
Mhm.
here has like a massive impact on the mortals who are just like fighting for their lives trying to
Oh
survive.
my gosh. Yeah.
The gods are just like, it's just a blip in history. I'm not that worried about it. Speaking of like your interest in Greek mythology, and I have all these little um things that you shared with the street team, which I absolutely loved, but I couldn't help but notice this pamphlet is
Mhm.
based on the poem and the poem of Aeneid. I can't pronounce it. And I was wondering, because that poem also goes into like um Aeneas or someone who was like another hero of like the Trojan War. Um,
Mhm.
are you also going to dive into like Roman mythology at any point in your career or writing journey?
At this point, I don't know. It was the journey to becoming, to going from just writing for fun
Yeah,
all the way through the publication process.
yeah,
I learned so much. It's kind of like
yeah,
drinking from the fire hose, you
yeah,
know. I learned so much, and learned so much about the writing process, even more than
yeah,
just publication and marketing. And so, really, I feel like I've only kind of touched on what's possible,
yeah,
as a writer. And so, right now. Roman mythology is so great, and I have a real profound respect for it because the Romans took a lot of Greek myths and gave them
yeah,
really cool backstories,
yeah,
and kind of, it was almost like fan fiction from Greek
yeah,
mythology. Like Medusa, they took her story and they said,
yeah,
well, she was actually, raped in a temple by Neptune,
yeah,
and that gave her, sort of this interesting character that was beyond what the Greeks gave her as she's just a gorgon, she's a monster because she
yeah,
is. And so the Romans really kind of took Greek mythology, adapted it,
mm,
gave it cool new rebranding, right?
yeah,
Um, and then expounded on it and gave backstories that I think make an even richer tale.
mm,
That said, Greek mythology is probably my first love.
yeah,
And at this point, just in kind of thinking about the books to come, I've probably bit off more than I can chew in my mind at this point as far as outlining books to come. So that's going to
yeah,
keep me busy
yeah,
for a minute because book two is obviously in the works.
yeah.
Books three and four are outlined.
Mm.
And so that's kind of the tentative plan
Wow,
for
there's
right
3 and 4 as well. Okay, I'm so
Sure. Yeah.
excited.
Yeah. Okay. Book two's at editing
Yeah,
right now, so it's obviously a lot further down the road, and it's a much larger story just
yeah,
because after the Iliad comes the Odyssey,
yeah,
and that's incredibly detailed and incredibly kind
yeah.
of vast scope of a story to
Mm.
tell Odysseus's journey. So I'm going to be busy with that for a
Yeah.
minute.
No,
But
that's so valid.
I, I think mythologies are so cool because they kind of shape our culture and they sort
Yeah,
of point back to a point in time when our culture was sort of evolving. And so
yeah.
I have a profound respect for a lot of different mythologies,
Mm.
and I'd love to do more research on a number of them.
Yeah.
And just kind of see where that takes me. So I'm sorry, I'm taking a
No,
long,
no, no,
winded
please.
answer to say that I kind of feel like the world is my oyster right now, and as far as
Yeah.
what I want to write.
Mm.
And that's a really exciting place for me to be, as a baby author. And
Yeah.
so maybe one
I
day.
absolutely love that. Well, Rick Riordan started off with Greek mythology and that just evolved more and more. So you never
Oh my
know.
gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even with like the law perspective in mind, when I was reading Hades's story of the underworld and how he's like become this symbolism of justice because he wants to make sure that the immortals have an afterlife that they deserve, not just because gods have interfered with the mortals, so he's not going to take that in consideration when he's like giving them an afterlife that they truly deserve for what they have like how they have performed in the world. And he has this whole I guess like a stance of neutrality on all these different occasions that come up. And I was wondering like how did you go about writing his character in that way? Because I could, as a law student and having studied law, like still am, could see a lot of things. I was like, yep, that's exactly like how judges try to go about case law.
Yeah. So Hades, Hades and Persephone is one of those retellings that
Mm.
there's a lot of retellings. I
Yeah.
think even right now, like with my book coming out, there's quite a number of other books that are being published that kind of shape this retelling. And I've read a lot of them. I've read Hades as a modern mafia guy. I've read him as this sort of seedy underworld character because it's just this incredibly evocative myth that inspires the imagination. It's captivating. It's a
Yeah.
captivating premise. And so I have never read a version, and that's the way the book came about, was I've
Mm.
never read a version that sort of captures it the way that I see it in my
Yeah.
mind. And to me, Hades is not one of the gods that you hear about as sort of he's not the womanizer that Zeus is.
No.
He's not super hot tempered the way Poseidon
No.
is portrayed in some myths. He really is sort of this bedrock guy.
Yeah.
Who just loves his wife, a little bit questionable in his dating or wooing of her, but
Yeah.
But he really is just this guy who loves his wife and is trying to run a tight ship in the underworld. And so the
Yeah.
way that I saw that play out was really that he stands for fairness,
Mm.
and death is the great equalizer among the mortals. And so he's trying to play that role out as sort of, in my mind, an ideal judge.
Yeah.
In front of judges a lot because I'm an attorney.
Yeah.
And I really did, when I was thinking about it, I really was like, their judges are people. The black robe, even behind the black robe, they're people.
Yeah.
Um, so some are good and some leave a lot to be desired, including ones that I've been in front of. I can
Yep.
say that really candidly. I think any attorney would say that there are
It's when
good
you bring
judges.
up the appeals.
There are judges that are the reason we have the appellate process.
Yeah.
Yes. And so, I wrote him kind of in the back of my mind. I was like, I want him to be the ideal judge. I want him to bring to
Yeah.
the table this sense of compassion, even though he's removed from them, this sense of
Mm.
compassion, this sense of fairness, this sense of, you do what you want in life, but you'll come to call for it in front of me.
Yeah.
And so, and there's sort of a formidability in that,
Yeah.
and there's an inevitability in that, which I think lends itself so, so well to his character. And I think it also makes him like a pretty attractive MMC, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
And
It really
so,
does.
and yeah, and so he's this sort of formidable character, but he's
Yeah.
not cruel. And I think that that's a way that he's portrayed a lot because he's sort of tied inevitably with death. Even
Mm.
though he's not the god of death, he's
No.
sort of that's sort of the hallmark of
Yeah.
the world, I guess. And so I think that, in a lot of portrayals, it's kind of like he's portrayed as this like really gruesome or macabre figure. And that's not at all the way I see him. I see him as being, you know, probably a little bit more towards the Roman version of him, if I'm
Yeah.
honest, and that they portrayed him as he's this figure of justice.
Yeah.
He's incredibly wealthy because all of the underworld belongs to him, including the
Mm.
jewels and treasures of the earth. And so I really kind of wanted to see that play out in the mythology that I write, or in the retelling that
Yeah.
I wrote, that's based on Greek mythology. So,
Yeah. People who don't know Greek mythology would always pair him like same as like hell and heaven. Like Olympus would be heaven, underworld would be hell, but then you start to realize no, 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 underworld is where all the dead go. So how does
everybody.
it structured there? And that's why I think Hades always got this negative light. I'm like, actually, to be fair, the way Zeus and Poseidon have treated some women in some of the
Yeah.
stories was like Hades is kind of coming out like the biggest green flag in comparison. So
Yeah.
it was really cool to see like how you saw him was like very it answered a lot of like my questions that I always had around like his character. I absolutely loved that. With Persephone's character, like to bring this like shy, timid kind of lady into the underworld through very unfortunate circumstances, and then she grows into like this very authoritative figure, as the queen of the underworld, and all these different like emotions that she's experiencing for the first time. How did you go about writing her character? Because I know like in a lot of your advertisements, like you do focus on like it's Hades and Persephone's love story in a way as well. But there's other love stories in the book as well, which I absolutely enjoyed. But yeah, we'll get to that in a bit.
For Persephone, I actually found her quite tricky to write.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is because sometimes, and this is not me criticizing any other author in particular, but sometimes female main characters can come across just so virginal and so kind of sickly sweet and
Yeah.
so innocent that you're like, who is this little doe-eyed Bambi that has wandered
Yeah.
across, the plot? And you do have to tell that a little bit for
Mm.
Persephone because that is the whole character, right? I mean, she's the goddess of spring
Yeah.
and she is sort of taken by this other, you have to have that contrast there because
Mm.
that's myth. And I didn't want to betray that in the myth because that's the portrayal that I think a lot of people expect. And that's what I would expect when I open, a Hades and Persephone retelling. And so I didn't want to betray that, but I also didn't want to lean into that so much that you're like, come on, girl, do something,
Yeah.
And so it really was trying to pair that innocence
Mm.
without it being sort of just a total loss of innocence. And so I think that the way that I did that was through focusing on her compassion.
Mm.
She's lived in the mortal world, which is unlike a lot of the other gods. They're sort of
Yeah.
removed. But Demeter, her mother, is the god of the earth. And so
Yeah.
they live in the mortal realm. They, live in the fields of Eleusis. And so she's had this really up close and personal interaction and encounter with the mortals. And so that
Yeah.
kind of feeds into her compassion for them that like, well, they're not our playthings. They're not,
Yeah.
there are women and children who are
Mm.
innocent in great combat that's this great conflict that's unfolding, and we should try to save what can be saved if at all
Yeah.
possible. And I think that her compassion is sort of the mechanism for her arc,
Yeah.
and ultimately using that compassion to sort of drive her to find agency and then step into
Mm.
her own power, when Hades is kind of forced to keep his neutrality because
Yeah.
there are, he's dealing with Demeter and Zeus and sort of the powers that be. He can't
Yeah.
really do anything, even if he wanted to. And so then she's just kind of like, well, I'll
She
do it
takes
myself.
charge.
Yeah, I'll do
Yeah.
it. So,
Yeah.
um, so yeah, but I actually did find her quite difficult to write. To me, she was one of the most difficult characters to write in the book, just
Yeah.
because again, you do have to keep it. You want that innocence there because they think that lends itself to the contrast, but
Mm.
you don't want it to just be so,
Yeah.
overdone to the point that you can't, as a female, you're like, I can't relate at all
Yeah.
to this person. So
No,
yeah.
I agree. I think at the start, like, definitely Persephone's character was, I was rooting for her to be like, come on, girl, come on, step up, come on. You just got to
Yeah.
accept and move on. Come on, let's do it. But I
Mhm.
think that's more my personality. But when I started to see how she took charge and she did things that no other god would have like even thought of doing, and she really like I guess like altered the events that went on with the Trojan War. Like her interference caused a lot of big changes. And at the end of the day, like she also gave justice because of those changes. Like honestly, like it may have like caused harm, but it also saved a lot of people at the end of the day. And I really loved how like she knew what she was doing. It wasn't just throwing darts in the air and hoping it will hit. It was very much like thought out, well planned, and going about it that way. But
Yeah.
speaking of Demeter, as well as like other mother figures in this book, and I don't know if this was like an intentional thing or not, but I genuinely thought that like the theme of motherhood in this book was very strong. Like we see that with Thetis, I cannot pronounce the names for the life of me. Achilles' mother. Then
Yeah.
we see that with Demeter, and then we see it with Amricambe, Hector's wife. Let's go with that one.
Oh, yeah,
How
Andromache.
that one. Like those three ladies especially, as well as a lot with Persephone, like she's obviously been in the mortal world. We see her like smile at children and she just feels joy
Mhm.
with their pureness. And even Hades, like how you gave his character arc, like how he sees the reason why he connects with mortals is because he sees the innocence in children, he sees the evil in men, but he knows like the world shapes you like that and all those kind of like concepts. But yeah, motherhood was like a strong theme, and I was wondering like, did you have that intention when you were writing the book, or did it just come about as you were writing the story?
Yeah, so it really just kind of came about. It
Yeah.
evolved that way. I mentioned children a lot because um they're sort of like the ultimate point of innocence and goodness, right? And so
Yeah.
I think one of the characters says that. So Aglaia says, that
Mm,
they're full of so much good. They're so full of
mm.
such potential for good, and that's why she loves children. And so I'm a mother. I have three little boys. I'm fully expecting one of them to come in this room at some point. Well, even though
Yeah.
they're supposed to be
Mine's
dead.
sleeping over there. It's a fur baby.
Oh,
Oh.
oh, sweet boy. But I'm a mom, so I have three little boys. They're 5, 3, and 2, and so they're
Yeah.
little guys. And I think that that's probably what you see on the text is probably what's
Mm.
bleeding in through my life, that I deal with
Yeah.
on a daily basis. But I do think children are like the focal point of innocence and goodness and compassion. They're easy to have compassion for a child,
Yeah.
much more so even, you know, not so much an army.
Yeah.
You maybe can't empathize or have compassion for an army, like
Mm.
armies that are fighting in Troy. But there are children in Troy
Mm.
with their mothers, who are going to fall, once the walls are breached, they're going to fall victim to the army
Yeah.
that's bloodthirsty outside the gate. And so, I don't know that the motherhood aspect was intentional,
Yeah.
but it's probably just reflective of my own experiences in that,
Yeah.
there are several visceral stories, especially with Hector's son.
Yeah.
So, that sort of yank on your heartstrings.
I
It's just a
cried.
knife to the heart. Yeah, I cried writing it.
Yeah,
I
I
almost
actually
didn't write
cried.
it.
I
I
also
almost
hate
didn't
that
write
like
it.
you gave a semblance of hope like two chapters ago, and then I was like, no, why would you do that? And as soon as I
Yeah.
saw that, I was just about to like flip on my Kindle, and I was like, I have a feeling, and if it is, I'm gonna cry. And it was, and I started crying, and I was like, damn it.
Yeah. So what I cried over with that plot line was Andromache, and I'm probably butchering her
Yeah,
name, but
yeah,
it is what it is. There's too many Greek names, and I don't know how to
yeah.
pronounce them
They're
all.
very
I
hard to
can't know everything about
pronounce.
everything, but
No.
that's how I say her name. So she, Hector and his son die, and but
Mm,
she's left. And so when I was writing that scene, I cried thinking about her, because if
yeah,
it was my children, I'm like, I'm going with you. But that was probably the hardest point of the book to write for me. I
yeah.
absolutely cried writing it. But I also think that there's a reason why it's in there, right? Because it shows that or there's a reason why that's in the original myth is because
Mm,
it shows that, nobody was immune from the scope of this
no.
conflict. Like the brutality of man consumed
Mm,
everything. It was just this wild
exactly.
fire that blazed, and it scorched everything. And so, I
Yeah.
really doing.
And there was just like, there's no saving at that point because the war was just going on for so long that the motive for it had just changed and gone about in a way of just pride and ego. So at that point, it was like, yes, it's Helen of Sparta being kidnapped, becoming Helen of Troy. No one cares about her after like a year. No one wanted to
Right.
worry about that. And it was just like so heartbreaking to see like even at the conclusion of the war, nothing's the same, nothing can go back to the same. People just needed like their hate to be directed at some place because there was just so much loss and so much sadness. And like just every time reading, like the River Styx was filled with souls was just so heartbreaking because these are people that just didn't deserve it. And then to see
Mhm.
like the gods again, like Demeter and whatnot, also going about filling up the
Yeah.
river Styx with more souls, and it's just like, girl, please relax for a second.
Still, like,
Like we have enough. Hades is
take
already too busy. But I think like those moments, especially towards the end, was very heartbreaking. And another story arc that really got to me was Helen and Achilles' friendship,
Mhm.
understanding, shared connection, trauma
Yeah.
bonding. Probably that's the best one to describe
Probably
it.
trauma bonding. Yeah.
Yeah. And just being put in a position where they both were like gifted by gods, but their gifts were
Mhm.
just curses. They were just used
First
as
it.
pawns with by these kings or by these gods and all these other characters that held more power than them. And I was wondering, like, when you were writing Helen and Achilles' character and kind of creating that shared admiration and like love that they felt for each other, even though they did not know each other, how did you go about that?
So theirs was a story in progress that
Mm,
happened a lot longer, way before. Excuse me, stumbling over my words. Way before I started this book intentionally.
yeah.
So I want to say it was my second year of law school, and I've been an attorney for
Whoa,
6 years,
okay.
so about 8 years ago.
Yeah.
I wrote just like a couple paragraphs that
Mm,
was, what if, Achilles died,
mm,
and then I hadn't done a ton of he died in the Trojan War, and then I hadn't done a ton of research about Helen, and so I didn't really
mm.
know how her myth ended, although it's not super clear cut.
Yeah.
Even in Greek mythology, it's sort of one of those big
Yeah.
open-ended plot lines where some people say, well, this is what happened. She died in
Yeah.
Troy. Some people say she went back to her husband. Some people say he killed her.
Mm,
So it's not a clearly defined storyline. And so I just was like, I'm going to write my own storyline. So I
yeah.
wrote 8 years ago a few paragraphs on what if Helen and Achilles had met in the underworld
Mm,
after the dust settled, after they'd both died or what, or whatever. What if they met in the underworld? And so I wrote this kind of just a few paragraphs about them meeting on the side of the river Styx, and then I had written it as a romance. As like, well, they would be, it would be this romantic scene, sort of a
yeah.
reunification of these characters who are familiar with each other but have never
Mm,
actually met, because when would they have met? And so I wrote that. And then as I was writing Where Darkness Bloomed, I was focusing on the Hades and Persephone line. And I thought, well, Persephone is this captured queen. Wouldn't
mm,
it be cool to kind of parallel that with another captured queen in the mortal world, who's Helen, and
Yeah.
kind of have the stories sort of running alongside each other as these sort
Yeah.
of mirror images. And so I started writing it like that. And you cannot write the Trojan War without Achilles. I mean, I just refuse
No.
to believe that. You have to have him.
Mm.
But I think one of the most poignant things about Achilles is his deep-seated sort of visceral relationships,
Mm.
men and women. So he's
Yeah.
got everybody knows Achilles and Patroclus, and that's
Mm.
been written as like, well, they're really close friends, they're brothers of
Mm.
the heart, they're lovers. I prefer to think that they were lovers. I think
Mm.
that they had a really deep-seated relationship,
Yeah.
and it was ultimately a romantic relationship. But in the Iliad, Achilles has, other really deep, sort of indefinable relationships too with male and female characters.
Yeah.
And so I sort of wanted to bring that over. And ultimately, I decided to do that through the sort of shared understanding that he develops with Helen, because they're
Yeah.
both experiencing sort of this disenfranchisement, right? So
Yeah.
he's come to war expecting glory, and he's found
Yeah.
nothing but pain. And she's been used as a pawn by
Mm.
more men than I mean, she's just
Yeah.
been by men. I mean, at least four from
Yeah.
the narrative that I wrote. But her myth is just full of that. It's just
Yeah.
full of people admiring her beauty so much they stop seeing her
Yeah.
really. And so through their shared experience, I really felt like, okay, he's a man cursed by wrath, she's a woman cursed by beauty, and I want to see
The
them sort of
dialogue.
find, yeah, sort of find a resolution together. But I also don't think as I was writing it, it didn't feel right to make it romantic, because I feel like Achilles and Patroclus, that was, the great love of his
Yeah.
life. He uses Patroclus as sort of this guiding force, steering him back towards honor. And so I really saw Helen for Achilles as sort of his pursuit to save her as being sort of the
Mm.
restoration of his honor.
Yeah.
And he ultimately, the book's been out for a while by the time this airs. And so he
Yeah.
ultimately kind of helps uh, bring about her resolution in that she
Mm.
finds peace in the underworld. And so I felt like that um, was a really solid resolution to bring them both. I
Mm.
felt like it brought their arcs to a conclusion together that I really liked. So, yeah.
Oh, their concluding chapter was that I read it like three times at least. Literally, as soon as I finished it, I restarted, finished it, restarted because it was just so beautifully done. And I just love how, like, both of them, like him accepting to stay and wait for her, was him letting go of his love story with Patroclus because he knew that he needs to be there for someone who understands him like no one else could, and that was Helen. And Helen accepting his embrace was for the first time, like accepting, like trusting a man again after everything she's been through is such,
Right.
such a huge step. And for her to do that, like that just kept bringing tears to my eyes every single time because I was just thought like, I need them to be protected forever. No one touch them. And it was that, like they both just accepted that they're
Right.
not going to let each other become victim to other people's powers and other people's plans and all these things. Like they're going to protect each other. And it was just so beautifully written. Yeah, I think that was the point where I was like on my stories, just like trying my best not to cry and to like advocate for this book so people pick it up as soon as they can. But even in like all these retellings, I know you've reshaped the story so it follows a chronological order that makes
Mhm.
sense for the narrative you've wrote. But there's so many different variations of the same Greek stories that we see. Like for example, with Aglaia and Hephaestus's love story. Although the love story is quite similar to how your retelling has been quite similar to what the lore is, obviously more like nuanced, but the actual origin of Hephaestus, there's so many different variations of how he came to being, whether it was Hera's I guess, distaste for him because he was
Mhm.
ugly, or like him being thrown off Mount Olympus, or if he was the one who cracked open Zeus's head for Athena to be
Right.
born. But like, there's just obviously they don't make sense when you look at all of them together. Like, you have to
Mhm.
pick one and go with that. So, how did you go about picking the perfect like tellings of the Greek lore to make your narrative make sense? Like, how was that research process?
So the research, I would research it and figure out generally the direction I wanted to go.
Yeah.
And then as I was writing it, it would kind of become its own thing.
Yeah.
And then inevitably I would not like it until I would read it. I would rewrite it about 100 times. And
Wow.
so Hephaestus and Aglaia was that way.
Yeah.
So I wrote the forge scene
Mm.
I wrote that first.
Yeah.
Uh,
Love that scene.
specifically the door scene, which is probably when he slams
Yeah.
the door, which is probably one of my favorite moments of the whole book.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but I wrote that, and then he's one of those characters where there's a lot of myths about him, but he doesn't get a ton of attention.
No.
His myths kind of focus on Hera and her whatever her deal is, and then Athena and kind of whatever her deal is. And so, he's sort of at the edges of a
Mm.
lot of myths, but in the Iliad, he is kind of a focal point for
Mm.
several. He and Thetis have a connection. She's
Mm.
Achilles' mother. And so the more I researched Hephaestus, the more I was like, he's actually kind of central to a
Yeah.
few things here, and so I really felt strongly about sort of breathing new life into his myth because I think
Yeah.
people mostly know about him as well. He's ugly and he's lame, and somehow he got roped into marrying Aphrodite and
Yeah.
then cheats on him all the time. And I feel like that's so unfair.
Yeah.
And so as I was researching it, I discovered that there are other myths where they divorce.
Yeah.
Hephaestus and Aglaia, or excuse me, Hephaestus and Aphrodite divorce, and then he ends up marrying Aglaia,
Yeah.
who's essentially the goddess of beauty, or she's one
Yeah.
of the characters. And so and I just thought, well, that's what an amazing upgrade, from
Yeah.
a wife who cheats on you all the time.
Yeah.
Like, why hasn't that been written, or why hasn't that been explored? And so it just sort of evolved into its own thing, but I really wanted him to have sort of his tales all read kind of bitterly to me. And
Mm.
like, how could they not? Your mother rejected you and you've got a wife who's gorgeous but cheats on you, and you have some type of infirmity,
Yeah.
whatever it may be. And so it's just like all of his tales are sort of written in this incredibly
Yeah.
bitter sort of light. And I just felt like there's another way to tell it. There's another resolution for him. Clearly somebody saw one,
Yeah.
because there's kind of secondary myth that's not super popular about him remarrying. And I just really
Mm.
wanted to tell that one. And so their storyline is probably my favorite
Yeah.
of the book. I love Hephaestus and Aglaia. I really do.
Oh.
And so I loved writing them. But I wrote the forge scene,
Mm.
and it was really a matter of sort of backtracking and kind of threading their interactions and seeing each other,
Yeah.
kind of tracing it back. So it wasn't just landing in the middle of the book and the
Mm.
reader's like, who are these people? And then also kind of carrying it forward, and really his role in the Trojan War and his connections to
Yeah.
Thetis. That's sort of what drove it forward. So,
You did that so well, like that connection, because you really need to give him a motive to care, to help out where he needed
mhm,
to forging, whether that be uniforms or weapons or whatever it may be. Like you needed to give him a motive because he obviously is not going to do something just out of love for Hera. He's got none of
right.
that. So I love how you tied that back in with his past and Thetis and how that connection built. And I just thought that was so beautifully done. And that's one of the things I really enjoyed about your book, how like everything connected. And there was no questions left unanswered. Also, like I know you said that Hades and Persephone kind of mirrored like the Beauty and the Beast. I thought Hephaestus and Aglaia really mirrored that because he was literally known to be ugly, and she's the goddess of beauty who also had her own insecurities, which is just insane to me because I thought that it's okay if I have insecurities, but you are literally the embodiment of beauty.
Like, gosh.
What do you mean? So I was wondering because they have like this they mirror each other's insecurities and they bring out the best in each other, but they have these inner monologues and perceptions about themselves. And I was wondering how like you were inspired to write that because there's not enough on those characters to take from their personalities from the original lore.
I think I wrote what I like to read as a reader. So,
Yeah.
especially in a romance plot, vulnerability by the characters kind of becomes the glue that sort of seals them together, right?
Yeah.
And so, oh, your baby's getting up.
Oh.
So vulnerability is kind of like the glue that like sticks them together, is sort of the way I look at it. As
Yeah.
a reader, whenever I see characters who are kind of being vulnerability sort of opens the door for tenderness, and I
Yeah.
love reading that. I
Yeah.
love spice too, but like I ultimately love when there's a romantic dynamic
Yeah.
um of devotion and just sort of shared vulnerability, and I love that. I
Yeah.
love reading as a reader. And I also feel like there's not quite enough of it on the market these days because
Mm,
things are leaning so heavily into spice. And again, I love spice. I'm not coming
mm.
for anybody who loves spice. So, all day long I love spice, but
Yeah.
I also do like to see that as well. And
Yeah.
so I was trying to write that, that's ultimately I wrote it because I enjoyed reading it, and it felt like there needed to be something more there. And again,
Yeah.
Hephaestus has this really bitter background,
Mm,
and that has to bring damage,
yeah.
that has to, but he still has power too. So he's got this really bitter background, but he's also the god of the forge, and they're in
Yeah.
the middle of this colossal war. And so he
Yeah.
is sort of in high demand, right?
Mm,
And is kind of being asked to do certain things, and he would have to feel bitter about that the family that rejected you is now sitting here saying, "Hey, we've all chosen sides and we need you to come,
yeah.
for our team, because now you're helpful to us, even though we
Yeah.
rejected you before." And then Aglaia is sort of this figure who sought him out,
Mm,
against all odds. She saw something and sought him out and said, beauty's not the same thing as perfection. Like I'm choosing you. But he also had this history with Aphrodite,
mm,
who's, like, how do you compete
yeah.
with that?
Yeah.
And so I just kind of wrote probably the insecurities that I would have had in that circumstance with that,
Yeah.
and then the tenderness that I love to read. I think that gives way to the best resolution,
Mm,
and so and theirs was one of my favorite resolutions, and theirs was a resolution that I got a lot of feedback on from my editor,
yeah.
Jess, who she's the only reason they got as good an ending as they got because she did a
Oh,
great job in saying, hey, here's where I think you should probe, here's where I
yeah.
think you should kind of push a little bit further. I think there's a better resolution to be had to their story, and
Yeah.
so she was instrumental in kind of
Yeah.
them getting what they deserved in the story
Oh,
for
that's
sure.
very sweet. How has this process been treating you? What have been like things you've learned or things you would do differently if you could do it again?
Oh my gosh, what have I learned? I've learned a lot.
Yeah.
I think the main thing that I've learned has just been that feedback is so crucial.
Mm,
So, like I told you earlier, I started writing this book. I'll say I had a rough draft within 3 months,
yeah.
probably, but it was only
Wow.
60,000 words. So again,
Still
and
quite a bit.
yeah, I thought at that point, like, oh my goodness, I have finished a book.
Yeah.
I've told the whole story. I've finished a book. And now kind of looking back, and that's been 2 years ago now, almost 2 years ago. Looking back, I can kind of candidly say, again, no, you had a first draft, and honestly, it wasn't even complete because you half the book was missing.
Yeah.
And so I at that point I made the mistake that I think a ton of new authors do, and I was like, this is a completed book. It doesn't need editing. I'm gonna just start sending it out, querying, and see what
Yeah.
happens. And so I sent it to like 20 agents, maybe 20 literary agents, maybe. And of course, like as you would expect, it was like crickets.
Mm,
And so didn't hear anything. But I will say, like, while I was kind of sitting there waiting to see if I'd hear anything, I was not satisfied myself with what I
mm,
had. I felt like, because it was mostly just Persephone and Hades.
yeah.
And I felt like it didn't have the resolution that I wanted it to have. It didn't have the depth or the voice that I felt was indicative of what I could write and what I should be writing.
Right.
And so, really, again, like a year and a half ago now, it became sort of this challenge for me that, well, I don't really care if three people read the book. I want to write as good a story as I can.
Mm,
I want to write a Greek retelling, and then, that's the best story I can possibly deliver.
yeah.
And I want it to be in language that is as beautiful as I'm capable of crafting.
Mm,
So then it just kind of became a challenge for myself. And I was like, okay, I'm going to need an editor because at this point, I'm kind of out of ideas.
yeah.
I'm too close to it. I've read it too much. I'm too close to it. I don't know
Yeah.
what it's missing. I don't know what it needs. I don't think I'd ever heard of a character arc then. And so that's really when was like, I need to get someone else to
Yeah.
professionally look at it and critique it. And that kind of drove me to my editor, Jess, who is just an angel. And
Oh.
so um, from doing, that process with her, where she began a full-blown critique, and we went back and forth on different
Mm,
plot points. We went back and forth on, what should happen here, how should the story develop, what would be, what are ideas I've been thinking of but just
mm.
haven't put on paper. That In doing that formal critique process, I would say that that's where I went from being a writer to being an author. Because
Wow. Yeah.
there's only so much you can do
Yeah.
without having, some formal criticism behind it. You're only
Yeah.
capable of so much, I think. And I mean, that
Mm,
obviously is my experience. There's some authors out there who I'm sure, are much on a much higher sort of caliber than me who can probably do it on their own, but I'm not one of them. And so I wish I could go back and sort of relive that experience of
yeah.
just being, sort of being in engagement with Jess and being able to do that for the first time because it really did open my eyes to what was possible in
Yeah.
writing. It opened my eyes to what was possible in the book and
Mm,
kind of that, a clear direction that the book needed to go in. And it was an invaluable experience for me. And so,
yeah.
again, I wish I could go back and relive it for the first time all over again because it was just the moment when I realized there's so much more possible here than me
Yeah.
just sitting here with my laptop trying to figure out where we're going. There's so much more possible. And that was an incredible moment for me realizing that. And so
That's
it's been
amazing.
great. It's been a great process. I will say the hardest thing that I've done as an author is figuring out when to stop editing
Yeah.
because I'm an attorney, and so there's some real type A tendencies that come with that, I think. And so and I think for a lot of authors, you're like, I want every single word to be perfect.
Mm,
I don't want to deliver something to a reader that's not absolutely perfect.
mm.
And that's well and good as the sentiment, but it's 113,000 words.
Yeah.
Every word is not going to be perfect,
Yeah.
but it's going to be something better. It's going to be yours. It's
Yeah.
yours. So, that's been the hardest part for me was figuring out when to stop editing because I would inevitably say, well, I'm just going to do a final read through before it goes off to proofreading.
Yeah.
And then I ended up rewriting half a chapter and I just couldn't stop.
Yeah.
And at some point, you just have to say, put the book down
Yeah.
and back away and let it go.
Exactly. That's
And
me with my theses as well. So I completely understand. Although that's only what 15K words and nowhere near to how much
yeah,
you're writing.
it's tough though. It
It
becomes your
is.
baby,
It
right? And
really
then it's
does. In the Trojan War, you see like so many different characters in the gods, Olympus, in the underworld. There's so many. How is the process of giving these characters so much personality, even though it's third person? Because sometimes to give characters personality, their inner monologue is so important for the readers to understand what their thought process is.
yeah.
And you still somehow delivered that like fantastically. So I was wondering how that kind of side of writing went about.
Sure. And that's one of the things I didn't realize is a big debate until I got a little closer to publishing is that some people have really strong thoughts about first person,
Yeah.
and some people who say like I can't read it if it's not in first person. And some people have
Oh,
really strong thoughts about, third person, like I can't
yeah.
read it unless it's in third person. I don't fall strongly into either one of those
Yeah.
camps, but I will say that third person POV um comes across to me in a much more epic way
Mm,
as
right.
opposed to from a first person where it's I did this, I did that,
Yeah.
to me, you're sort of limited by that person's understanding and not by
Yeah.
the observations of everything.
Agreed.
And so I like third person. I tend to favor it. And I do think it's easier to write it on an epic scale
Yeah.
when you're not attributing all your words to a specific character.
Yeah.
So even the verbiage that I use in describing things.
Mm.
I don't know if that's what Hades would really necessarily be thinking to the point that I could credibly say that. He's thinking that the underworld rose above him like a shard of obsidian. I mean, I just don't know that he would
Yeah.
be thinking that. And so to me, it was the easiest way to write beautiful language without having to worry about the credibility of the character was to do it through
Yeah.
third person. And then it's also again just what I enjoy reading. But I will say for each chapter, it's a close third.
Yeah.
And so, even though it's third person, you're still getting some of Hades' inner monologue if it's his
Mm.
time to kind of have, if we're following him.
Yeah.
You still know that when Patroclus dies, Ray, Achilles' vision turns black and
Yeah.
hateful wrath rips down his spine, so it's a
Yeah.
close third where you're still
Yeah.
encountering, sort of the visceral emotions that whatever character we're following is experiencing.
Yeah.
But I do think third person lends itself to, again, to a more epic sort of sweeping scale
Yeah.
where you're sort of observing everything and you're not limited solely to the character's understanding. Because also,
Yeah.
like, the characters aren't able to know everything about everything. But if you're in third person, you as the reader are kind of above it
Yeah.
and observing everything. And so you see the characters' blind spots, you see what they
Mhm.
know and what they don't know. And I do think that that sort of lends itself really well to foreshadowing too, and kind of creates this sort of foreboding sense of inevitability, which I
Yeah.
thought would really do well with the Trojan War. Because,
Yeah.
and I don't make it a secret. I hope it's not a secret because I put it in all of my marketing. You know, Troy falls, obviously. Troy
Yeah.
burns. Like, I
No,
don't
not a
think that's a
secret.
secret. I hope it's not.
Yeah.
You know that's coming. You know it's
Yeah.
coming. Most people know Achilles is gonna die. I hope I didn't
Yeah.
spoil that for anybody. Achilles is gonna die. That's the
Yeah.
myth. So you know it's coming.
Yeah.
And I think that as a reader, I sort of enjoy the tension that comes with leaning into that, waiting for it to happen. And
Yeah.
I think again, third person sort of lends itself well to that. So
Yeah.
personal preference.
I completely agree. I personally do prefer, I think it depends on the kind of book I'm going for, where if I prefer first person or third person, but I completely agree that with third person, I think it's slightly harder to write, or not just to write, to read as well, because you have to observe the surroundings to really understand what's going on in the character's head. But something you did really beautifully was that every time I read a new chapter, and if it's on a different character, your chapters don't have which character it's going to be about. But the
Mhm.
first three sentences immediately tells me who it's about without naming the person, just because you've built that connection between the character and the reader from the early stages so vividly. And you've also given like enough I guess, justice to the original Greek mythology that the readers can slightly fall back on that as well. And then they see, like, oh, okay, Athena's here. Who might she be talking to? That makes
Mhm.
sense. Like, those kind of
Right.
things, like, really fall through just simply because readers also know snippets about the original lore, which I really liked. And that was very enjoyable. When you were writing this book, and there was a lot of points in this book where, like, you're trying to give honor to the original stories as well as tell your own retelling. Were there any moments that you get like took risks that you weren't sure how it's going to play out and how it might go in the story, but kept it anyway?
So I think probably the biggest one, and the people who read it may disagree and say it's something totally different, but the biggest risk that I took was Persephone sort of engineering Achilles' death.
Yeah.
Um, I
Oh,
don't,
right. Yeah. I love
yes,
that
because she
part.
sort of, so do I. Like I had to give
Yeah.
her agency in some way,
Yeah.
and that was the way that I saw to do it. But, you know, that's probably the biggest, risk that I took, I think.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the biggest risk that I took. I may be wrong. I think that's probably the biggest risk. And then I would say that, and then also Helen's resolution. So
Yeah.
Helen's the underworld, and that happens through Persephone,
Yeah.
kind of bringing her down. And so Persephone does to Helen sort of what Hades did to Persephone. And
Yeah.
so,
Exactly.
yeah, and I really liked the way that mirrored.
Yeah.
And I will say those aren't clearly defined storylines,
Mm.
The basic facts of Achilles' death is the same. He's shot through the heel by Paris, the arrows guided by
Mm.
Apollo. And so those major points are the same that they
Yeah.
are in his myth. It's just that there's some filler
Oh,
about
yeah.
what's happening behind the scenes, which,
That
I
was so
mean,
emotional.
can't say it didn't happen, but
Yeah.
it's not a clearly defined storyline. So I
Yeah.
felt comfortable saying, well, this is kind of how they tie together. And then
Yeah.
same thing for Helen's resolution. Again, what happens to Helen of Sparta after the Trojan War, there's not a clearly defined storyline.
Yeah.
And the way that I wrote her whole character was that she's there involuntarily. And even
Yeah.
that's not, clearly defined. So
Yeah.
some people, overwhelmingly, she's depicted as sort of running off with Paris of Troy. And I have never liked that story.
Mm.
I've always felt like, why would she do that?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just never sat well with me because there was so much at stake. And then Paris wasn't her first run in with a bad person.
Yeah.
You had Theus, you had Menelaus, and
Yeah.
I always just felt like I doubt she would have just jumped on a ship and taken off with him
No.
to his house, to his homeland, knowing that her husband, with a powerful brother and armies untold, would come after her. That just doesn't
Yeah.
really sit with me. It feels like that's sort of a strained plot. So
Yeah.
I wrote it as she was truly kidnapped by Paris, who
Yeah.
in my story is obviously the villain, or a villain. And so
A villain.
a villain, a villain is a better way of putting it.
Yeah.
So really, those are. I'm realizing I took more risks than I probably thought I did, but those are probably the
Yeah.
biggest ones that I took as far as just retelling Helen's Troy to be that she truly was captured. She's sort of this victim of circumstance, and then Achilles' death sort of being engineered by Persephone,
Mm.
and resolution with Helen.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are,
Yeah.
I would say, the biggest risks.
To be
So
fair, like even if it was a risk, you gave it a really, really like original story tied backstory with the whole goddess of discord, Eris coming in and causing that rift between Athena, Artemis, and Aphrodite trying to basically bribe for the prize of being the most fair, which ironic.
right, yeah,
And that's how Paris falls into this possessiveness over Helen. So it had that kind of like chronological structure which made sense. And that's why it's not hard for a reader to accept those risks because they were done really well. So yeah, even though it's a risk, I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I'm so glad that you took them.
yeah, and I felt like that kind of lent, and of course that's the original myth is that he
Yeah.
is sort of gifted her, he's gifted her, and
Yeah.
he's gifted Helen, and like Helen has no say in that, and
No.
so and then
Aphrodite's just like, yeah, you can have it. I'm just
you
like,
got her,
hello.
yeah, you what?
Yeah.
Say what
Not your
now?
daughter, not she's no one to you. How can you just gift someone to her just because like you gifted her beauty? Like, no, that's
Right.
not okay.
Right. And I felt like that lent itself well because then, of course, Paris, as this, sort of young, robust prince, has this sort of sense of entitlement that, like, well, I was
Yeah.
given this woman by this goddess. And so obviously I'm
Yeah.
entitled to all of, to all of it. And so
Yeah.
anyway, I just felt, again, I've always felt like Paris should have been a villain. Even in
Yeah.
like Troy, you remember the movie Troy?
Yeah. Of
Okay,
course.
I watched that as like a teenager. I was always like, and he was played by Orlando Bloom, and I was a
Yeah.
teenager, so that's really saying something. But I didn't really
Yeah.
like his character even then.
I know. No, it's also interesting because Hector is also considered a villain because everyone's always like hero, Achilles is the hero, so whoever he fights is the villain. That's just how we go, black and white, you know? But you gave his story just an incredible arc as well. So I really enjoyed seeing his personality as well because in my head I was like, yeah, Hector's not a good guy because he's Paris's brother, so we don't like him.
Mhm.
But then in this book I was like, actually, I do like him. He's not that bad. He's kind of
Take it
bad, but not
back.
that bad. There's
Yeah,
people worse. Let's just say it's like he's a lesser of evils compared to the other ones. That's what it was.
yeah, for
Yeah.
sure, for sure.
Um,
I've always liked Hector's character because I feel like he's sort of caught between his foolish brother and his
yeah.
complacent father, and
Oh my
he's just
gosh.
sitting there
Absolutely.
trying to deal with this mess,
Yeah.
and ultimately he's the one who pays most dearly first. Of
Yeah.
course they pay later, but he's the one of the first those first tragic figures that
Mm.
dies, and that's just always like ugh.
Yeah, I
um
know. It was really heartbreaking. One final fun little question. If
mhm.
you had to pick one song to that represents your book, and this would be so hard for you, and I know, do you have any that come to mind?
Oh my goodness. uh,
It's also hard
all I
because,
listen to, I have a
yeah,
weird thing. So all I listen to in the probably last year and a half have been movie soundtracks.
yeah,
And so
valid.
I will,
Hans Zimmer.
yeah, yeah. There's a and this is not a movie soundtrack, but there are sort of a number of like Viking drum soundtracks that are out there
Love
right
that.
now that are huge on like Instagram and TikTok. And I
Yeah,
found them when I started marketing for this book and was like, it's it's the book. Like this is like the soundtrack that I hear whenever I see the book's
yeah,
cover now. So if you go on my Instagram or my TikTok and you pull any of my marketing materials, whatever the song, there's one called Fire Queen.
yeah.
Lord help me. I love But I would say those are kind of what remind me of the book now because they just have that epic sort of
Yeah,
sweeping. swoop and a lovely
Oh,
downbeat.
that's
And so,
amazing. I
yeah,
actually
so
have a
I would say that.
playlist. Yeah, I have a playlist which is literally
Oh,
Viking
really?
music. I'm not kidding.
Oh my goodness. It's wonderful.
It's
I'm
so
like, that's
good. It touches your soul because of the drums and stuff. Like it really just like moves you, and especially when it's playing in the car. So that was so good to hear that you're into the same music because that's
it's
exactly
so
what I was
great.
picturing when I was reading the book. And I was like, just epic music.
I told Garrett, so my husband Garrett,
Yeah,
I was like, this is what I'm gonna play whenever I write war scenes from now on. Because I mean,
yeah.
it's like you're like, my heart's been racing a little,
Yeah.
It's great, so
That's
great.
exactly what you want. Well,
Yeah, great.
thank you so much for all these conversations today. This was so, so amazing to just hear your process, your journey about the book. And I just loved reading your book. And I'm so grateful that I could be on your street team because it's just been like one of those books where I know I'm going to be thinking about it for a long time. To wrap it up, I was just wondering, like, is there anything you want to say or anything about the second book, any release dates or anything coming up?
Yeah, so just short update. So, second book's at editing right now. It's first
Yeah.
round of editing, and so tentative release date is going to be May or June of
Oh,
2026.
amazing.
Which won't be that far out from the time this podcast
No,
releases.
not at
It's a little
all.
ways out right now,
Yeah.
but it won't be that far out. So it's obviously that Weird Darkness Blooms the sort of retelling of the Iliad and of
Yeah.
course Hades and Persephone. So the second book, if you've read the epilogue, you know that it gears up for
Yeah.
Odysseus' story, the Odyssey. And so the hope was that we kind of carry on the same theme and the same uh way that I wrote the plot for this
Mm,
one is that it's telling the story that you probably already know because a lot of people know, stories of Odysseus that's been retold
yeah.
in a lot of different modern ways. Um, but also kind of pulling in where the plot line's not super defined, pulling
Yeah.
in new characters and new motivations, or not new characters, but characters you already
Yeah.
know, but sort of giving them new motivations, sort of behind the scenes, and kind of weaving the story a little bit more like that in the
Yeah.
margins. And so that's really what I'm working on now is finding those side plots, finding those side characters, making sure that they are kind of doing what I want them to do, which
Yeah.
is kind of hard to do,
It
but
is. But you've accomplished
yeah,
it once. You definitely have no doubt you'll do it again.
that's the hope. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's a much larger story. I will
Yeah.
say this book, Where Darkness Bloomed was 113,000 words by the time it was finalized. Um, book two, again, it just went to first rounds of edits.
Yeah.
So book two is like 135,000 words now,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
and I'm
I think
expecting that to
I
grow.
think it's fine though because I think first books are often like a little bit shorter and then the second book it's like you can make it as big as you want. The readers are hooked. They're gonna want to read regardless.
That's the
Um,
hope.
do you have a
Yeah,
title for it yet?
I do, and that's going to be a reveal. So it's
Okay.
coming up. It'll be coming up. I'm trying to get past Where Darkness Bloomed, and because it's almost out the door.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to give myself to December,
Yeah.
and then going to start shifting to looking at book two. So the
I
title release
can't
will
wait.
be cover art is already scheduled. It'll be early
Yeah.
next year, and then we'll really. I asked my husband, I said, "Are you ready for book two?" And I will say his eye like didn't even twitch, and so I'm really proud of that.
Yeah.
He's been great. He's been a rock.
Oh, that's sweet.
So as far as something I want to say, to the readers, I just again cannot put into words, how much I appreciate every little bit of support that I've received, whether that's from people buying the book, from people interacting with me on social media who were following me, even from a few months ago when I had 50 followers and was trying to figure out how do you get anyone to comment to anything on Instagram. I so appreciate all the support I've had because I certainly wouldn't be gearing up for book two if I hadn't received
Mm,
that support. And so honestly, um, this is just sort of a shameless plug for indie authors.
not at
If you
all.
want to
Yeah,
read, yeah, if you want to read beautiful stories, on some level, you have to support the authors who are out there trying to write them. And so
absolutely.
I think that's just kind of the natural sort of course of events. And so my goal in interacting with my readers has been I've tried to be generous to my readers, and
Yeah,
I hope that they're generous to me back.
you really have. I've never received such a lovely package for a street team. And I was
Thank
so
you.
grateful to receive it. And it's just so well thought out and it's so sweet. Like, look at these. It's just so sweet.
I'm so glad it reached you. I was like, oh my goodness,
I
I'm
know.
shipping this thing from Mississippi to Australia. I
Did you
hope it
have
gets
a
there.
lot of like international ones or were they mainly American?
I did have a lot of international ones. I had
Yeah.
about 15 international, and the street team
Wow.
was about
Yeah.
32.
Well, it
So
reached
much.
us safely, so I'm glad.
Yeah, that's right. So there was a
Yeah.
few in the UK and Canada, and
Yeah.
then someone in Tasmania,
Oh,
too.
really?
Yeah, yeah. I
Oh
was like,
my gosh.
cool. I had to go to my
Yeah.
post office and say, okay, if I want to send something to Tasmania, how many
Yeah.
stamps do I need? And the postal worker was like, I'm going to call a manager. And so I said, that'd be great.
Yeah.
But we figured it out. We figured it
Yeah.
out.
Awesome. Well, yeah. Well, I'm so grateful that you could be on here today. This is amazing. And I can't wait for your Where Darkness Bloom comes out and then the second book. And I have no clue where the third and fourth book are going to go because after the Odyssey, what else is there? So I'm going to do my research on my part to try to figure out where those stories are going to go. And I can't wait to have you on here again after a lot more of your books are out. And hopefully by that point, you do an international tour or something. I'll keep rooting for
Hey,
you that
fingers
that
crossed.
happens. Yeah,
My fingers are very crossed
absolutely.
for
Yeah,
me, for sure, for sure.
but
Well, thank you so much for having
congratulations.
me. I so appreciate it. Again, I appreciate every little support I've gotten, but I've so enjoyed our conversation.
I
Like, here's
know.
also just, I know we've gone back and forth in our messages a lot,
Yeah,
and it's so nice to just appreciate someone, or just to be able to talk to someone who has a really deep-seated appreciation for the mythology and can
yeah,
say, these are the things that I thought were really cool. And after having those conversations like with myself and anybody else who would listen, it's really
yeah,
nice to be able to kind of have a back and forth with someone who is
yeah.
also deeply entrenched. I've
Yeah,
so
we've
I've
got
so
that type
enjoyed
A
that.
personality down pat. Absolutely.
Yeah, there we
But
go. There we go.
congratulations. Your first book is coming out soon. By this time, by the episode releasing, it will be out. You'll be a published and selling author by that point. I know you'll be selling because I'll be buying it. So at least we
I'll
know
take
that.
it.
Yeah.
That's right.
And yeah, good luck with everything in the future. And I hope to continue seeing all the things that you do on social media with your books and your releases. I can't wait. I can't wait for you. I can't wait for like you to have like a J.K. Rowling kind of growth where a publishing agent just
My
picks it
goodness.
up and just like pushes it off the charts because it genuinely has the potential to be that.
Oh, well, you're very kind. Again, my fingers are crossed for all of it. So I'm just
Yeah.
I'm just again excited to see kind of where the path takes us. I really am.